Hello. We need to talk about this canto and what Ryoshu's seasonal ID is going to be. And in order to do that, we need to talk about all of the other seasonal IDs and what they are. Because I don't think a lot of the Limbus Company community really understands what the seasonal IDs and their ego are because of a very specific term that you hear constantly if you play Limbus, and that is the concept of the bad end ID. This term is so incredibly misleading because it is kind of what the seasonal IDs are about, but it's such a drastic oversimplification of what the seasonal IDs are for a lot of reasons, really. But let's get into it. So, one of the bad end IDs people talk about is G Corp manager Corporal Gregor. This is a season 1 ID. It's not really used for anything other than solos, I believe, but I don't really do solos, so I don't have it leveled or uptight at all. But it's supposed to be Gregor's, or people who say it's a bad end ID say it's supposed to be Gregor's worst ending. It's the worst ending of Canto 1, which, first of all, didn't make any sense before Canto 9, and it really, really doesn't make any sense after Canto 9, but we'll get into that. Because he doesn't parallel any character other than himself. Like, this ID is just another version of himself from Canto 1. And not in Canto 1 either, it's just a random Smoke Wars cockroach soldier. It's not Gregor, it's not any important character, unlike all of the other bad end IDs. So it doesn't really make sense to call it like the Gregor ID of Canto 1. And it just didn't make sense then, but it makes even less sense now because of one character or one event in Canto 9, and that is, of course, the Roach Emperor. And this event that happened to Gregor makes it very clear that G Corp manager Corporal, weird name, is very much not the worst possible thing that could happen to Gregor. I mean, if you played the level, you know. So no, not a bad end ID. Let's get into the actual bad end ID of season 1, the capstone. No, sorry. The one who shall grip Sinclair. This is the first example I'd say of a seasonal capstone ID. Not and the first one I'd say that is the real proper example of a bad end, like the worst thing that could happen to Sinclair in Canto 3. This ID is, of course, based off of the one who shall grip Sinclair, which is sewn to Sinclair by Cromer with the mirror. That's what this ID is based off of in Canto 3. Cromer literally shows Sinclair a version of himself that is one of the one who shall grip, And it is this ID. It's this guy. It's this guy. Look, Cromer Faust right there. Look at her. Crazy. She has spiral eyes. I never noticed that about her. Um, but that's him. He is special among the seasonal capstone ID because he doesn't have a seasonal ego. He doesn't have a seasonal the primary ego of like the final battle pass ego was fourth match Flame Ryoshu. And he is, and this is like season 1 jank, of course, because all of the other seasons have their capstone ID to have the final ego. But I mean, it is still burned, but still. So sorry. So he's just his ID. And he is very strong. He was probably the strongest ID of that season. I did not play season 1. I just started in season 8. But he is the primary ID of season 1. Next. What was Canto 4? No. Canto 4, we have Efferflorescent Ego Spicebush Yisong. Love this ID. It's great. But he is the first example of a of a seasonal ID having a seasonal ego, and that is Drifting Fox. Now, they don't have quite the same uh, wait, no, Sunshower. They don't have quite the same outfit, but the character who Yiseng is frankly cosplaying here, or a parallel to, that being Dongbaek, does have this, and she also has the it's the ego suit of no, the ego suit of Spice Bush, not Spice of Drifting Fox Sunshower. She has the ego suit. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. No script. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I need to work on script writing. But she does have this, and now you saying it's not literally meant to be Dongbaek in this mirror world. He is. I'm pretty sure Dongbaek is dead in this mirror world. Yeah. But yeah, so he's taking her place. She parallels him as like the primary antagonist for the majority of Canto 4. And he, of course, gets he gets the ego of her and the ego suit of her. Well, not the ego, the Limbus ego of her original ego suit, and then he gets her efflorescent ego, of course. And now we're getting to the really interesting thing because for Ishmael in Canto 5, we have the Pequod Captain Ishmael, who is meant to parallel Ahab. And of course, she has dispense blind obsession. And this is the first proper ego where they're basically wearing the same outfit as the seasonal capstone ID. That's an important note for later. But the blind obsession is, of course, an important part of both Ishmael's and Ahab's characters. Now, this Ishmael is not literally Ahab in that mirror world, just like Dongbaek. She is Ahab. She kills Ahab, and she takes on her role and starts dressing exactly like her for some reason, because that's totally normal. And of course, she has the blind obsession of hunting down the whale again, and she tries to kill the pallid whale. Pallid whale. I wanted to call it the pale whale, but that's not that. No, it's the pallid whale. And she becomes the Pequod Captain Ishmael. Yes, yes, yes. Don't really like this ID's gimmick, but she's the seasonal highlight. Now we get into the idea of the bad end, and this is certainly a bad end for Ishmael. She becomes the same manipulative, horrible person that Ahab was. But is it the worst thing that could happen to Ishmael in the story of Canto 5? I'd argue no. It would make more sense for the season for if it was based off the bad, worst possible thing that could happen would be for Ishmael to become a mermaid because the whales turn them into mermaids. Yeah. But that doesn't really make any thematic sense. Like how well, it does, but that's not like Ishmael's main character flaw. And that's what these IDs are about. It's about the characters giving in to their worst flaws, their worst selves, not the worst thing that could happen to them. It's them becoming the worst version of themselves. So let's look at the next example of this, and that is, of course, Wild Hunt Heathcliff. Now, this is the first example, kind of the seasonal ego not exactly perfectly representing um him, but let's look at him. King and Binds. The King and Binds ego. Now, this, objectively speaking, it doesn't really look like Wild Hunt Heathcliff the same way Blind Obsession Ishmael literally just had Pequod Captain Ishmael's hat. Like it doesn't really look like Wild Hunt Heathcliff. But of course, if you fight the King and Binds in the railroad, he has Envy Vicantula and then he fights you. And how does Wild Hunt Heathcliff do it? He summons the Wild Hunt, which are a bunch of Envy Vicantula, and he fights you. And this ID also summons summons a ghost, a Wild Hunt thing with one of his passives. This one. Wait, no. Which one is it? I think it's this one. I'm not reading. But the point is, this is an example of not exactly the worst possible thing that could happen to Heathcliff, but Heathcliff paralleling another character, another person. And I do mean another person, because this is, of course, based off of the um the Wild Hunt Heathcliff from Canto 5. Wild Hunt Heathcliff, well, not this specific Wild Hunt Heathcliff, Miracles are infinite and all, but a Wild Hunt Heathcliff shows up in Canto 5 and is the main antagonist. But that's kind of not getting into how Mirror Worlds work. Mirror Worlds, that Heathcliff is, objectively speaking, a different person from our Heathcliff. It's the same thing with the one who should grip Sinclair and the mirror that Cromer shows Sinclair, but that Heathcliff and our Heathcliff are two different people who lived different lives and different things happened to them, and they're different people. And this ID is Heathcliff taking on and having an ID imposed upon him that is of another Heathcliff, of another Wild Hunt Heathcliff, who is not Heathcliff, our Heathcliff. It's why the Wild Hunt Heathcliff in Canto 4 has the little question mark next to his name. He's Heathcliff? All confused, you know? He's confused Heathcliff. But yeah, he is not the same person, and that gets it. The seasonal IDs are supposed to be parallels. They're supposed to be people who parallel their 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 people, their our sinner taking on the ID of of someone who is supposed to parallel them and kind of becoming exactly like that person, but not like literally becoming that person. But then we get to Don Quixote, so let's talk about Don Quixote and her seasonal capstone ID, the manager of La Manchaland. Now, at first, this does kind of throw a wrench in that thing of not literally of them supposed to being parallels to each other, but it actually doesn't contradict that because, come on, that's Sancho. That this Don Quixote looks exactly like Sancho, and that is important because, well, yes, Don Quixote and Sancho are technically the same person, and they're the same person. They're the same. I what? They're the same person, but they're they're different personalities. Don Quixote's main parallel in her story is herself, that being her two different personalities. The fantasy of Don Quixote and the reality of Sancho. And her story is about those two people becoming one again and making Don Quixote a better person for it. It's in her song, her Millie song. I am my enemy and my friend. She's two different people, so she's still paralleling technically a different character. And you could also get into how Dad Quixote, he's dead, but this ID and Sancho in general is certainly supposed to parallel how Dad Quixote becomes this like nihilist, and how Don Quixote becomes this optimist, and this is like what if Don Quixote became that nihil it's the it gave into that nihilism of Sancho. It's her worst aspect of herself coming out. It's not the worst thing that could happen to her, though. The worst thing that could happen to her, though, is probably like going insane, like the rest of the Bloodfiends, and becoming starved and whatever. But of course, she has Rocinante, and her ego, which is the most blatant. Oh, okay, the most blatant of it. Oh, wait, why am I have the which is the most blatant of it, yearning Mercalia, which is literally just she's literally just manager of the Manchaland and Don Quixote, but covered in roses and in a slightly different outfit. Look at her. She's exactly the same. Come on. And then we have Hong Lu. Hong Lu. Can't wait. Lord of Hong Yuan. He's literally GQ. He's dressed exactly like GQ. He has the same hairstyle. He just has the thing over his eye. And then his ego, which is also dressed nearly identically to GQ, just the white replaces the black, and it's the same kind of outfit. Is it? It is. Yeah, it's the same kind of outfit. He looks pretty much identical, and of course, it interacts with Lord of Hong Yun in a special way. Which brings us to Ryoshu, who doesn't have her seasonal ID yet, but she does have her ego, and she does have her canto, and the story of that canto, and I could get in. Well, should I get into how? I don't really want to get into how parallels and what, and how she and what character, and she has characters that parallel her that we can talk about. Let's look at her ego. Oh wait, I'm stupid. I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everyone. Please forgive me. The great trichilocosm. That. A jellyfish. But not just any jellyfish. Jellyfish that dresses Ryoshu up in a traditional Japanese wedding outfit. Jellyfishified and with a sword. Right now. Ah, forgive my stupidity. Hmm. Hold on. Oh my god. I don't care. I'm gonna give up anyway. Come on. Come on. Yeah. I don't like this. Ooh. Oh, wait, that's right. Well, you saw the traditional Japanese wedding outfit. Okay, okay, I get it. You saw the traditional Japanese wedding outfit. She wears a traditional Japanese wedding outfit. That's a rare. Yeah. A rare. Precious baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just, yeah. So she wears a traditional Japanese wedding outfit, just like, hey, Ryoshu's ego. But what is the point of Ryoshu's Kanto, and what is her worst tendency? I really hope my mic didn't pick that up. Um, Ryoshu's Kanto is about parenthood and motherhood specifically. And there are two characters who wear that traditional Japanese wedding outfit. Ryoshu's mother and her daughter Arare, of course. And Ryoshu's main failing in this canto is her failing as a mother for Arare, of course, if you are the canto, you know. She fails as a mother. And her mother also most definitely failed as a mother. Of course, probably worse than Ryoshu. Ryoshu hates her mother, but they both fail as being mothers. Let's look at Sinclair's art here for a second. No, that's the Pinky Nurse father. The one in the traditional Japanese wedding outfit. It would make a lot of sense since the bad end IDs are reflections of the worst aspects of the sinners for Ryoshu to get an ID of her mother, of her becoming exactly like her mother. Becoming because it would be her worst aspect. It would be her failing as a mother even more. And like in the Uptie stories, it could be that Arare becomes the new child of the House of Spiders that the nurse fathers are all trying to raise up. And Ryoshu becomes exactly like how her mother was with her. Ryoshu's mother was obsessed with Ryoshu not being like her. Ryoshu not being like her mother. Her mother was obsessed with her. Not, I'm, bleh. So it would make sense for Ryoshu to become exactly like her. That would be a very, very bad end. But would it be the worst thing that could happen to Ryoshu? Arguably, no. Arguably, which is what I've been seeing a lot of, the worst thing that could happen to Ryoshu is this her unsheathing her sword and gaining Muga and going on like a rampage and killing the entire house of spiders. That could be the seasonal capstone idea, everybody. Wouldn't you love to see that? Wouldn't that be so cool? Ooh, awesome music. Please shut up, music. I don't want you to get in the way of me talking. Let's get back to this. This could be the bad end Ryoshu ID, and that would certainly be a bad end. Her, like, killing everyone in the House of Spiders and forgetting Arare, maybe even killing Arare. That would be terrible. That would be the worst thing that could happen to Ryoshu. But how does that reflect, like, her? How does that reflect Ryoshu's worst impulses? How does her killing Arare and everyone in the House of Spiders be the worst would be reflect poorly upon her in any way or really be interesting, because that's something we've already seen. That's something we already got to see with this Kanto. Tianshu Star, her becoming the Tianshu Star. She's already the Tianshu Star. We already saw her. All the people in the House of Spiders die. We already saw her unsheath her sword. We already saw Arare sacrifice herself for her, or whatever. She's dead. So we would just be getting this again, which would be really boring. We wouldn't learn anything new about Ryoshu, unlike all of the other bad end IDs, which shows us something actually like negative. This doesn't show us anything about Ryoshu. It shows her becoming a non-person. It shows her becoming the hell screen. It's Muga, the non-self. It's her becoming no one. She's not a person anymore, which is terrible. It's a terrible thing, but it's not the point of the seasonal IDs. The seasonal IDs are not the worst thing that could happen to someone, to the sinners. They are reflections of like the worst aspects of them. It's them as a person doing bad things, not them becoming this. While this would be cool, how would, and that's not it. That's not it at all. How would an ID like this even work? How would purple coins work? I've seen a lot of people say, although that they wouldn't, that they just wouldn't include the purple kings points. But is that not the entire point of this thing? Of her gaining Muga and unsheathing her sword is the purple coins? Is her erasing me, erasing you, erasing everybody? Murder, murder, murder? She erases these two from existence? They don't exist anymore? They're dead? How would that work gameplay-wise? Oh, that has a special defeat screen. I didn't know that. I didn't think you could lose. Never mind. I don't know why that exists. Um, but that would be so boring. It would be something we've already seen. It wouldn't make any sense gameplay-wise. It would be so boring. It wouldn't teach us anything new about Ryoshu. Ryoshu becoming her mother would be super interesting. She looks so she looks so cool. She could have new gimmicks. She could be the first proper ID with all unbreakable coins, with no like conditionals around all of those coins being unbreakable, unlike Li Hang Salt. Li Hang Mare Salt. She could have a full thing. She could have so many gimmicks. She could be so interesting. But in order to do Muga Ryoshu, they'd have to take away everything that made Muga Ryoshu interesting, and it also wouldn't even be interesting, which would ruin the point of Muga Ryoshu, but it also would just be boring from, like, a storytelling perspective, because, like, we already saw that. And you're giving us what we already saw, but now with all of the cool stuff that you'd want that as an ID for, and it's gone because there's no way they could balance purple coins. They couldn't. And not only could they not do that, it would just miss the point. And hold on, let me think. What was I thinking? Mm, But that's the point. That's the point. Is that it wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't make any sense. It would miss the point. It wouldn't be a reflection of Ryoshu. That's it. Ryoshu is not a reflection of herself. Like, they're not two separate people. Muga Ryoshu and regular Ryoshu aren't reflections of each other like Don Quixote and Sancho are, or regular Heathcliff and Wild Hunt Heathcliff are. They're not parallels. They're the same person. Which gets us to another thing, is that Muga Ryoshu is an action that our Ryoshu does. It's an action. It's not a person. It is a decision Ryoshu makes. It's a decision. Like, she makes the decision to unsheath her sword. Mugi Ryoshu is the action of unsheathing her sword. So how would you even turn that into an ID? How would that make even any sense for that to be an ID unless it's literally identical to regular Ryoshu, but her sword is unsheathed, which would be so boring. And I guess the other option would be her in her ugly tracksuit, which would also be boring because that tracksuit is ugly and is completely uncomparable to the rest of the bad end IDs who are all awesome looking. So yeah, it would be boring and bad. That's what I think. And if we got Pinky, Pinky Nurse Salva Ryoshu, she'd be the first triple status ID, first proper triple status ID. You don't count. You don't count. You have free statuses, but you don't count. The first proper triple status ID would be the Pinky Nurse Salva, because that's look over here. And that would be cool. That's another thing that would be cool. That would be so cool. Just because her ego, poise, poise, where's bleed? I know you have bleed. Does she not have bleed? I swear. I swear she. Okay. She inflicts poison. I swear to. Is it in this fight? Does this version of you? Am I stupid? I swear she inflicted bleed and burn. I guess that's not a point. But she could with her ego, with her seasonal ego, which looks literally identical to the Pinky Nurse Favre, because they're both wearing Japanese, traditional Japanese wedding dresses. But that's what I was getting at. Bad end IDs do not exist. They are made up. They are seasonal capstone IDs. And seasonal capstone IDs are parallels to a person in the sinner's life that like represents like the worst aspects of them. Ishmael's obsession, also Heathcliff's obsession, Yiseng's depression, Don Quixote's nihilism, Sinclair's like anger at everything, Hong Lu's indifferent. Like it is like he does do stuff, but like look at this guy. He's indifferent to everything. Look at how sad he is. He's so sad. It's Hong Lu going into his indifference is the point. But that's what they are. So what if Ryoshu like just gave in to becoming exactly like her mother, like she was becoming before she met Arare, and she still met Arare, but treated her exactly the same way that her mother treated her. And Arari becomes the new like child of the House's Fires, and that could be the upside story for for the thing. And that's what I think is going to happen. So we're getting, I feel like we're getting Pinky, Nurse Father, Ryoshu. I feel like this is Ryoshu, especially since this Sinclair, unlike the other apprentice IDs, doesn't name drop any of the other. I feel like it pretty much just confirms that she's Pinky Nurse Father Ryoshu. I feel like that it confirms it. That would be triple status and everything. Maybe we could finally get poison on an ID. Finally inflict poison. They didn't do it with the she though, but you know. We could get poison, maybe. Probably not. But that's the point, is that I feel like we are going to be getting Pinky Nurse Favoryoshu, and that Muguryoshu is like a really bad idea and really boring and not really possible, I feel like. And that I feel like we as like a community need to move away from using the term bad end ID because that's not what they are. That's not what they're. That's such a really annoying oversimplification of what they are. It makes much more sense to just call them seasonal capstone IDs, which is what a lot of people already call them. But I don't feel like bad end ID should be a phrase. It's very misleading. Very, very misleading. What is happening with my frame rate? But it's very misleading, and I don't like it. That's what this was about. This was about how also this video was spurned on by how annoying, how incredibly annoying the illiteracy jokes in the community are. Illiteracy isn't funny. At least to me. At least to me, it's just annoying. It's just annoying, and it was annoying me. So I made this video. I made this video because emotions. Okay, okay. Because I really liked Canto 9, and I feel like the reason people want Ryoshu is because it would be cool. It would be so cool. But it really wouldn't be. It would miss like the entire point of Canto 9, I feel like, because Canto 9 is about parentalhood and motherhood, and Ryoshu feels kind of disconnected from that. It's her becoming a non-person. It's her failure, but it's also not really her fault, if that makes any sense. It doesn't really make much sense for the idea to just be cool. It needs to tie into the themes of the canto, and I feel like Pinky Nurse Favoryo or Dehu Star. I'm sorry with the pronunciations in this video, by the way. I'm so sorry. I feel like Pinky Nurse Favoryo would just be better. Would be make more thematic sense for the canto. Yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now.